Okay.
What is up? We made it work.
Not a Yeah, the beauty of technology. See, this is a plus. This is a
I
positive right here.
know. Well, you're a little younger than me. This is a big step. We used to just, have a
I'm
dial
embarrassed.
in.
You got on before I did, Gordon. I'm embarrassed now.
Thanks for doing this, my friend.
Oh, of course, my pleasure. Thank you.
All right. So like I said before, this is not the new platform for me in terms of going live with some of these things. And I'm trying to get some people to get to know some of the great people on my team like yourself. And I'm really kind of excited to talk a little bit about technology tonight and our mental health, because
Sure.
as we using technology to get on here, my frustration level went up a little bit, so you can only imagine in the big picture
Yeah,
how that is. But Michael, can you maybe just
for
take a
sure.
minute to just introduce yourself to everybody or whoever watches this later?
Sure. Yeah, and thank you again, Gordon, for inviting me to do this. So my name is Michael Dzwil. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I'm newer with the Long Island Teletherapy team with Gooding Wellness. But it's been the practice that you have is really kind of proof that the tech is such a valuable tool. I mean, during this whole pandemic and everything, we saw people not being able to physically get out to appointments. So being able to create a program like this where everything is done solely virtual has been such a positive. But my experience is working with adolescents in an inpatient psychiatric setting, as well as in outpatient treatment and in rural areas. So I've been able to kind of see, excuse me, children and adolescents in all different levels of care. And this is always something that does pop up as far as the excessive technology use. And now more so than ever, where parents kind of turning around and saying, what can I do? This is such a part of our lives at this point where abstinence is really not an option. You kind of have to be able to use your phone. You need to be able to use your computer. So, a lot of the parents I talk to that are struggling as far as kind of setting some limit in a real ongoing issue that's kind of been further exacerbated over the past year or so.
Yeah, I mean, it's so, we spoke a little bit earlier. I think that the duality of technology and mental health is so funny because prior to, March 13th, 2020, go outside, get off your devices. And then all of a sudden it's like, I found myself as a parent, like encouraging my kids, like get on a Zoom with the kid. Like all of a sudden now I'm like encouraging them to go on the devices because they were so isolated and separate, right?
Yep. Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head with that, Gordon. I mean, in the past, and this is something that's kind of changing year to year, day to day, because this, in the grand scheme, I mean, smartphones and things like that have really only been around since mid 2000s, 2007, 2008. So this is technology that continues to change. And in the beginning, a lot of it was based on, well, how much screen time is my child? How much screen time is my adolescent getting? And now that we're learning more about this, it's almost transitioned to less so about how much screen time and more so what the content is. So to your point, Gordon, somebody might be on the screen for 3-4 hours a day, but if you're doing 3-4 hours of school, that's different than if I'm using my phone for video games. That's different if I'm using it to kind of aimlessly scroll through Facebook or I take that back. Facebook is apparently obsolete at this point. Now it's all about Snapchat and Instagram and stuff.
Got TikToking.
Yeah,
right?
TikTok, and tomorrow there'll be a brand new app that everybody jumps on. And
Absolutely.
That has been one of the bigger shifts that I've seen where it's about screen time per se and more so, okay, you're used for whatever, for an average of 6, 7, 8 hours a day. What are you doing in that 6, 7, 8 hours a day? Is this 5 hours of researching and schoolwork and then 2 hours or 3 hours to kind of enjoy yourself and play video games? Because that's different than somebody who's stuck on it for 10 hours a day where, again, they're just kind of aimlessly scrolling.
That's such a great point. I love that. It's not so much how long, it's what you're doing with it. I think we forget sometimes that, this is a tool. It's an amazing, powerful tool, this little device that we're on right now, and that, it could be good for good and bad, right? It can be, but it is a tool, and how you utilize it. I and some aspects, like we're talking about with kids and adolescents, like thank goodness they had access to, I mean, I'd walk into my daughter's room some days and it'd be like 4 girls on a screen, just, like, it was so good in the middle of that isolation when they hadn't seen their friends in weeks. Like, thank goodness they had that. right?
Yeah.
And at the same
Yeah,
time,
absolutely.
go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a big part of it. I mean, we've seen just over generations just the tools for communication have just like back in the day it was, well, now I have a cordless phone. I want to bring the cordless phone to my room or whatever it might be. So today, our day, this is the main way of communicating with peers and communicating with friends and things like that. That to your point, like you said, pandemic, we didn't have the ability to necessarily physically go out and see friends. So without this, I wonder what it would have looked like, without our ability to stay connected, because human beings want some form of connection. So if we didn't have this technology and this great stuff, it would have been a very dark time where you'd only be seeing the people that are physically in the house with you because we weren't going out at the time. So this helped people stay connected. And I think what it comes down to, I mean, when I'm speaking with parents, when I'm speaking with adolescents as well, the word is always balance. Video games, smartphones, bad things, if it's done with some kind of a balance. If you are talking to somebody who plays video games for 3-4 hours and say, geez, 3-4 hours a day, that's a lot of gaming. But this is also a person that's going to school and succeeding and doing really remarkably well. This is a person that's on the football team. This is a person that's in theater. And at night, they're letting loose and things like that, is playing video games for 3 hours. So in that case, would you turn around and say it's necessarily a problem? Maybe not. It's extremely individualized in that sense versus the person who's playing maybe 4 hours of video games, but they're not functioning in the day-to-day stuff. They're not getting out of their room. They're not showering. That's, the important thing where we have to kind of...
That's where we're crossing that line into excessive, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that kind of comes back... Exactly. And that comes back to us as clinicians. That comes back to us as parents, kind of not assuming that child is using the phone for 3-4 hours a day, it's necessarily a bad thing. I would take a deeper, how are they doing in other areas of their life? And I find one of the biggest things as well when it comes to this, when you're talking about gaming, when you're talking about the phone, whatever it is, what it comes down to is also exploring the why. A lot of times as parents, it's very easy to turn around and say, stop doing that. You shouldn't be using your phone that long. Enough is enough. But do we ever turn around and explore the why? If I'm playing video games, what is my main reason for wanting to do? Is it so I can socialize? Is it because maybe I'm lacking competition in my life and this is where I'm getting that friendly competition? So kind of almost meeting that person where they're at. And we learned this in, Social Work School 101, meet the person where they're at, and really kind of getting to the nitty gritty of why they are engaging in whatever behavior they're engaging
in. It's so true and so powerful of how, there's so many, it can be so excessive, right? And it also has such power, but there's also like the motivation behind it. I always say the same thing. I deal a lot with people who struggle with substance use, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if someone can go home after a long night and have a glass of wine and everything, that's great.
Yep.
But when you can't do that, one, it's identifying that it's not, things are not in control, right?
Yeah.
But the other part, and I think you said it so well, is, what is it? What's the function of it? What are we serving as?
Yeah.
When we I look at this as, technology, and I'll, in full disclosure, this has been a long year. I have caught myself on my own scrolling through nonsense and I'm like, why am I doing this?
Yep.
Just because I was bored, just because, it's been a long year. There's discomfort, there's anxiety, there's isolation, like there's a numbing effect that goes with that, mindless scroll sometimes, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's that's one of the functions of it, it's nothing wrong with getting a little bit, but if we're spending all this time scrolling or video gaming, are we just avoiding something else, right? And I think that happens a lot.
Yeah, and I think also the important thing to remember is this stuff, and I don't necessarily, well, to a certain degree, I guess, to the creators, there's some blame with them as well, but this stuff is built to become addictive. They want you to continue to come back. So aside from just the fact that I'm bored, there's something more that's bringing you back. Like there's a remarkable book called Hooked by a gentleman named Nur Eyal. It's a phenomenal book, and basically his book speaks about this, basically this cycle in a sense of what causes things to become addictive, whether it's technology, whether it's whatever. And one of the things he speaks about addictive technology is their ability to turn something that was originally an external factor, so a ding on my phone that's bringing me back, to something that is now an internal trigger, an internal. Now, to your point, Gordon, it's not so much that I'm getting a ding on my phone or an alert. I want to go back to this thing because I'm getting something from it. So, useful and really successful technology, exactly, useful and really successful technology no longer needs an external, igniter in a sense, because internally I'm so used to going back. I think what you said before, Gordon, is really important, as far as treating addiction and things like that. And a lot of times people turn around and say, well, technology addiction and video game addiction, is it truly an addiction? A lot of times we want to compare it to something like alcoholism or individuals that are addicted to heroin, different things like that. And what we're finding is it's more similar to individuals that struggle with things like gambling. So kind of reframing how we view internet and technology addictions to kind of frame it more so in a comparison to people that might also struggle with gambling versus somebody who is struggling with alcoholism per se. And when you're treating any form of addiction, I think the important thing that you mentioned before is we go back to what we know best. If I'm coming home after a long day of work and my coping skill is to sit down in front of the TV, sign on with my buds to do some online gaming, that's what I'm going to do. But if you give me something to kind of fill that void, that's going to be something I look forward to doing. That's when you start seeing a break and a change of behavior. Because if you turn around to somebody who's been gaming for the past 10 years of their only source of entertainment is scrolling through their phone, and you tell them to stop, but you don't give them something else to potentially fill that void, they're going right back to it. It's not going to be a very long lasting type behavior.
Yeah, I know. I think too. And one of the things that I've always connected, and it's funny talking, I'm thinking about the work I've done with in addictive stuff, but it's like, well, teaching people to be with ourselves, right? Like that,
yeah.
Mindfulness is about how do we just be, how do I just be with Gordon? Just that I'm picking up the phone because there's discomfort, right?
Yep.
And it's like,
yep.
So if I'm not picking up the phone, then I got to deal with just being with myself in some way. So it's like, and that's a skill, right? I mean, listen,
yep.
There's so much stimulus coming at us now that it's really not normal. There's always so much data coming at us, whether it's these reinforcers through the phones or the text message or the notification or like all these outside stimulus. Like you said, it's like without it, it's like we're kind of getting very used to it, and it's hard, it's very hard to sometimes turn that off.
Yeah, and Gordon, you're talking about, adults as well. And that's something, like you said, I've fallen victim to that tons of times. Every single day, there's something that catches my attention that I really shouldn't be doing at the time, but it's bringing me there. I want to see me juggling the basketballs, like it brings me back and I'm curious about it. But also think about how adolescents are impacted by this, where main goal and desire is to be connected with peers and feel as though there is that fitting in and sense of camaraderie in a sense. And there is that extreme fear of missing out, or FOMO as it's, kind of known as today, where if I get a text message or a parent is telling me your bedtime's 10 o'clock, shut it down, but my friends are still talking till 12, 1 o'clock in the morning, that's 3 hours of gossip, 4 hours of gossip that I missed out on. So that's also a huge struggle, because just putting the device down yourself, it's also understanding that, yes, I'm going to put my device down, but I'm also understanding that my friends are probably going to continue to use this device, whether that's video gaming, whether that's phone. So that's the other tough thing with it.
I was going to say, and that's where our anxiety goes up, right? That's where the angst goes up, whether it's, anxiety, the perceived missing out, right? It doesn't necessarily, they could be talking about nothing, but to sit in my bed and without my phone and know my friends might be talking about nothing. It's a perception I'm missing out. So the anxiety, and then, we're telling our kids to go to sleep. They can't sleep because they're up in their heads. And then as it's like that anxiety can then lead down to, and it's this, could get into this vicious circle with that. Right. And I think that's hard. I think that's so hard.
I mean, pretty much.
Good. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Gordon. This seems like there's a little delay, so I apologize to cut you off. But I see, pretty much consistently when I'm working with adolescents and children as well, even young adults, of course, one of the main things that seems to suffer is sleep. So many times, and I'm sure you've seen this as well, Gordon, so many times you talk to people and they turn around and say, well, I'm getting about, on a school night, 4 or 5 hours of sleep because my friends are gaming till 1 o'clock in the morning, or, I just don't want to break away from the phone until 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. And that might be early for some. I've heard people going to bed at like 3 o'clock in the morning. So that's something that's also really been a challenge, because if you're not functioning at 100% and at 100% if you're sleep is so interrupted or just so minimal. So that's been something that I've really seen, just, not so much the technology use, it's how that impacts our day-to-day life, whether that's our eating routines or our sleeping routine, whatever that may be.
Well, yeah, it's basic functions and our basic wellness plan. And what's so ironic about it, and I talk to parents and kids about this, and adults, is that, we're anxious, so we're staying up late so we don't miss out. But now we're starting with a sleep deficit, which just makes us more vulnerable to anxiety, depression, than any other mental, right? That we're putting ourselves at a higher risk for that, because that's one of the cornerstones of mental health is good sleep, and adolescents struggle with that, and adults.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, the $1 million question, if we because a lot of us, we could speak probably all day about the addictive potential and why we continue to go back to it. And even the science behind it. I mean, there's science and studies done about how our phones or using video games, whatever it might be, we are getting that jolt of dopamine in that sense. So naturally, I mean, we're going to want to go back to what feels good, what makes us feel connected, what we enjoy. So, I think we all understand why our technology is addicting. I think the $1 million question is, as ourselves, how do we limit it and develop that balance? And, like I said, I think what it comes back to, especially as a parent, because we can kind of look at this two different ways. If I overuse technology in some way, some of that might be my own need to kind of self-regulate and figure out where my balance is going to come from. This is a different conversation when you're talking about a parent with a 12, 13, 14-year-old that they need to be the ones to kind of help that child self-regulate, because, a lot of times, I mean, adolescents a lot of times are just naturally impulsive and naturally kind of glued type of technology. So them being able to set their own limits is usually not something that's going to.
Yeah.
Correct. Right.
So
I think what it comes down to as a parent is also understanding that these things are not going to change over times. I talk to a lot of parents where they turn around and say, well, you know what? I'm done with it. I'm taking the video games away. He plays 8 hours a day. I'm taking the video games away. And that seems like a really great idea. Naturally, if he's doing something and it's too much, I'm the parent. What I say, I'm shutting everything down and taking it away. And the problem is, a lot of times individuals who are adolescent age, child age, they have a hard time going from all to absolutely nothing. So I think what's important to talk about it, and of course we could talk about the hierarchy, parents should have their children listen to them and stuff like that, but I think the operative word is should. It's not always going to work out that way. And does it make sense to kind of have this World War III type dynamic when this is something that can hopefully be avoided by some kind of collaborative problem solving in a sense? And I think, again, going back to the why your child is using it, and also the next step is how we're going to go about reducing it and developing more balance. A lot of times, again, like I said, abstinence and breaking away from technology is not realistic because they're going to need this in their life. So we need to figure out how we can instill.
It's not just like we
balance.
Cannot ever touch a phone again. This is here to stay. This computers are here to stay. So do you have any tools that you've suggested to parents, like to, because that's a tough ground to kind of figure out, because they need it for school. They need it, you want to have some social interaction, especially right now, even though things are kind of slowly moving back to normal. How do you kind of coach the parents you work with what's the right answer? I know there's no right answer, or right answer for them, I should say.
Yeah, it comes down to, again, is dependent on the child. Is it truly an issue, or are you just uncomfortable with how much time they're spending on the video games? Or, is this legit an issue where they're not going to school anymore because the video games are so invasive or the phone is so invasive? So it's very individualized in that sense. But I think number one, again, and I said it a bunch of times, and I apologize, Gordon, for sounding like a broken record, is exploring that why. So I think one of the things I've seen is working with adolescents or children that really enjoy technology use, and they tend to clam up in therapy. So a lot of times it's the good, I don't know, those types of responses. But if you kind of ask them what types of games they're into or what types of apps they're into, you have to turn around and kind of regain control of the session, because they kind of just word vomit, their passions and things like that with regards to it. So I think as a parent, it's kind of important to understand it's not you against them in a sense. It's kind of trying to understand where they're coming from while also getting your point across too. So this is collaborative problem solving 101, because a lot of times it was an awesome video that I think I shared with you, Gordon, about this gentleman. He's a psychologist that spoke about instilling your will or imposing your will. And yeah, imposing your will where you just want to tell the child, look, you're not doing it because I'm the parent and what I say goes. And like I said, when you're kind of meeting them that way, it becomes a real power struggle versus the problem solving where you're kind of appreciating where that child is coming from. You're helping them understand where you're coming from. And then we're coming up with some kind of a clear understanding as far as what's appropriate use of technology versus inappropriate or excessive, whatever that might look like. So that allows the child or the adolescent to have some level of buy-in in this as well. And then in turn, hopefully be more invested in whatever the agreement is. And that's obviously dependent on the family, whatever their comfort level is. And I think, one of the things I loved was individual treated technology like phone use and video game use as dessert. So when your schoolwork is done, that being the dinner at X amount of hours or X amount of time on the video games. And I think a lot of times what ends up happening is we let the child come home and kind of decompress and, half hour of video games turns into 4 hours. And all of a sudden we're scrambling at 10 o'clock at night because we found out Johnny has an S. Usually when parents are have an issue because now John is failing English. So, a couple things. So I think that viewing it that way, the video games or the phone use is dessert. We get our homework done first is a great idea. Or I also love the idea of coming up with, again, a collaborative discussion that maybe 2 hours is the amount of time you get on tech, whatever that is, technology, whatever technology you prefer, you get 2 hours, and allowing that child to have some level of control. Because one of the biggest things that we get pushback from adolescents and children on is they feel like they have no control, what this goes. And that's really, it's a crummy feeling for a child or an adolescent to feel. So if the agreed upon amount of time is 2 hours, then at that point as a parent, you take a step back and say, you know what, John, if you want to come home right from school and get your 2 hours out of the way right from the get-go, cool. But then when your 2 hours is done, then the rest of the night you don't have it. So it almost kind of creates this level of autonomy in a way where the parent still has control, I guess you could say, but the child feels as though they get a little bit more say as far as when they can use it. So that's just a couple of different ways that I've learned and tried with parents, and it's been pretty successful. And I think also, and I'll kind of end it on this, Gordon, as far as what the parents could, I think one of the things that's important also is not waiting until we're in crisis mode per se. So a lot of times it's, we want to stop our child from playing video games. And, we find out for the past 5 months, these video games for 18 hours a day. And again, that becomes the struggle. So I think when we start seeing this is kind of going down a path that we're not super keen about, then we're starting to kind of sprinkle in, some level of limit setting so that, again, we're not in crisis mode where it's World War III. We're kind of able to have a realistic discussion where everybody's kind of on board.
It's interesting. I'm thinking of what you're saying. I'm thinking, it's like we almost parents, I think sometimes we try to get on board too later in the game, but these kids are learning it so young. It's like I would almost, as you're talking, I'm thinking, wow, we should almost work with parents to come up with a technology plan, because you kind of have to learn it at a younger age, and it's going to adapt as you get older. But how do we grow into it and to teach them these skills and these patterns? And it's just, it's like homework, all these, it's like another homework routine. It's a technology routine. How can we kind of instill that into some parents that need the help? Because sometimes this stuff takes off so quickly. Yeah. It's like, if we don't have some things in place when they're younger, it's really hard to put the brakes on it in 10th grade, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And what I'll say to that, Gordon, because that's a really excellent point. A lot of the literature I've read and studies that are done find that parent or the family component to the treatment for somebody that's struggling with excessive technology use is integral. It needs to happen. So a lot of what the treatment plan looks like, where they've seen a lot of success, is some kind of a social skill group for the individual who is excessively using technology, whether it be video games or phones, because again, that social ability to kind of reconnect with people outside of a screen type thing is very beneficial. But it's that coupled with, CB techniques as well as the family component to treatment, because one of the biggest things where we kind of take one step back is when parents come up with awesome plans, and hats off to the parents because they're doing a lot of the work in that regard, but then carrying it is a struggle. So if we turn around and say, Johnny, you get video games for 2 hours a day, and Thursday rolls around, we had a long day at work, and we turn around, Johnny, I don't want to hear it anymore. You could have it for 4 hours. Just, leave me alone. All of a sudden, Johnny takes that as, well, cool, I guess it's no longer 2 hours, it's 4 hours. So the family work and treatment is so important because a lot of support themselves. Because Gordon, I'm sure you've seen it. I know you have, children yourself, and I know I have a little guy, and he loves it. That it's tough to kind of, set those limits because they want what they want. So I think, consistency is also something that's super important, because a lot of times in these types of situations, we see the behavior worse before they get better, because the child or the adolescent is going to want to up the ante and kind of push it a little bit because they're hoping that you'll give in. So being consistent and getting that support as the parent is also super, super important.
Yeah, and I love the idea of, and I always say this with adolescents, like adolescents, they want total independence, but they're not ready for it, right? So it's like that helping them gain some sense of control, right? Like, and listen, and I also say too, is that teens, as much as they'll never admit it, they do want some set of boundaries on them, right? They may not, they do. I mean, I know they don't like it or they will never admit to it, but there needs to be some sense of boundaries. So, that how you communicate and navigate that is, I always say to parents, like, how do we give them a sense of control, but within, I always say, like, I always make a comparison to a road, like we're going to have guardrails on the side of the road. We're going to stay in the lane, right? But there's guardrails. We're not going to go off the road this way or this way, but we got a lot of lanes to work in here. And that's really, I love the idea of, and that's how do we get them invested in it? And that's communication and validating their feelings, because this is, I think it's validating their feelings. And I don't know about you, Michael, but I didn't have this stuff growing up. So recognizing my own fear that I don't know what it's like to grow up with an Instagram account. All I had was going in the backyard and, I did not, hanging out in the street until it got dark out. It was a totally different world. And not right or wrong, but it's like, it's my fear because I don't know what to do. So sometimes as a parent, you might want to just be like, oh, let's shut it down. And that's not always the right answer.
Well, and I'm laughing, Gordon, because what you're saying is it's spot on, because they have a term for this. There's digital natives versus digital migrants. And you and I are considered digital migrants. We knew the world, and I know we're not super, super old, but we know the world, before 2006, 2007, 2008, when smartphones kind of really emerged and kind of became super popular. We knew what life was like before that. So this is not the norm for us. We turn around and say, Joe, go outside and play in the sun. It's a nice day. Whereas digital natives that grew up where, and a perfect example, my 4 years old and my child is a year and a half, and they already know how to unlock phones. They see us know to unlock phones. It's just, this is what they grew up in. So this is now the norm. Sitting in front of a computer screen all day long, normal, because all my friends are doing it too. So that's the other thing that's very tough. When things are socially acceptable, it's tough to change a behavior. Like we could talk about smoking, and obviously I don't want to compare the two, of course, but you talk about something like smoking. Back in the day, it was socially acceptable. You could walk into a restaurant, you could sit on a plane and smoke. Now, if you light a cigarette in the middle of a restaurant, people are like, what's going on over there? What's this guy doing? That's what technology is. Anybody can take their phone out at any time, and no one. This is just the culture we're in. And I'm not saying it's good or bad, but the new norm in that sense, as far as technology use goes. So, like I said, Gordon, we could look at this and say, this is not okay because we're used to the world being a little bit different. People who are 10, 11, 12, 15 years old, this is the norm.
This is the norm, and we have to find a way to deal with it. That's I always say that's kind of like the resilience. It's not things should be a different way. It's how do we make things work with what we got, and this is the technology we had this past year. We've had these kids in front of these screens for amazing amount of hours, and some of it was really good and some of it may not have been, but
I said, I mean, revisiting that word of the day, balance. That's what it comes down to. We're not saying video games and technology is bad. Phones are so many positives. And like I said, just the past year alone, since last March, this has really got us through this hurdle as far as this being able to stay connected with friends, having some source of entertainment. I mean, look at, esports. People are making millions of dollars playing NBA 2K on ESPN, where, millions and millions of viewers are tuning into this. So now the other thing for, migrants and even digital natives, of course, as well, is that this is a legit career path. It's funny. I had lunch with my friend the other day, and he's a pro gamer. He's my age, so he's old school. He plays a game called Tekken, but he is a pro gamer. And I was talking to him. I was saying, I mentioned his name obviously, and I was, is this okay? That adolescents are spending so much time. And he said, Mike, honestly, the way I view kind of practice. So if you're looking to do this professionally, you're going to be doing hours and hours and hours of this game a day because you need to get your practice in. So that's also the mentality that we're competing with a little bit, where an adolescent or a child is turning around and saying, Michael, get off my back. This is what I'm going to do professionally when I get older. So this is me kind of prepping and laying the framework for that.
Yeah. And it's so balance, right? Yeah. Cause
Yep.
this is,
all back to balance.
there's all these technologies were not an option for us growing up. Like we didn't foresee it. Listen, if you would have told me a year ago, I'd be on an Instagram live talking about, I'd be like, I don't know, but here we are, right? Like we, as human beings, we adapt, and our kids have to learn how to do that too,
Well,
and I think
full disclosure, Gordon, this is my first Instagram live ever. So I appreciate that it was with you. Cool. This is the first time I've ever tuned into a live thing on Instagram.
And I love the fact that you think we're the same age. That's really what's all about. Yeah, we've only done about 3 of these, but man. But there is,
it's awesome.
And just to kind of, before we're going to wrap up in a minute, but I think technology especially with the adolescents, and especially this year, to be so isolated, as human beings, and you said it before so well, we want to be connected, right? We want to be connected. We want, we're social beings, right? And I think, we can hide behind a screen, but sometimes when we think our kids are hiding behind their screen, they got the headphones on, they're talking to people about Fortnite or something, and they are connecting. It's just a totally different way of connecting than I knew or you knew growing up, right? So,
Yep.
and I think that's another kind of red flag too, is are they connecting or are they just isolating online, right? Because one can be very,
right.
a lot more socially acceptable than the other. And we all need that.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
So it's just a very interesting, duality of the whole thing. But maybe just before we end, go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and there's Anthony Ferrandino watching us.
Oh, hey, Anthony. But the interest, I'm very curious to see where it's going to go, just because the bizarre thing is just in such a short period of time, like the past, 15, 20 years, there's been so much change, just in the tech world. So I'm so curious to see where things are going to go and how we continue to adapt, because, this is something that, maybe the new norm is having all conversations behind a computer screen and never really physically seeing each other. So I'm very curious to see where it eventually goes, and hoping that we stay connected and understand the benefits of that physical interaction versus that screen to screen interaction.
Yeah. And, and I'll end on one kind of final kind of thought is that, as much as this technology, feels sometimes it pulls us apart, and, like you said, there is this balance. There is also so much benefit can come from some of this, I mean, we're utilizing, not to do a selfless plug, but teletherapy, whether it's with us or somebody else, is really bringing counseling and mental health support to so many more people who couldn't always leave work, go drive to a therapist's office, sit down and get some support where they can just kind of close the door and see, even with kids who don't want to go out there, but they, but they can just go in their room and do, there's the accessibility to some mental health services through teletherapy. There's some great apps out there, and even some of the apps on our phone that help us track. I mean, sometimes I get this notification on Sunday of how much time I was on my phone, and it's good, and it makes me reflect, because I'm I know some of that, it's just me mindlessly scrolling and being numb. So, as much as, this technology can be a challenge for our mental health, there's the other flip side of it too, is we can also utilize this technology to be a really good tool. I don't know what you think.
Yep. Oh, I agree. I think you said it perfectly, Gordon. I agree with everything you just said.
Yeah. So I know, because that's one of the exciting things about doing the teletherapy and we've done, and I've seen a lot of therapists here on the island and the country doing it, is they're saying, I'm seeing people in their cars at lunchtime, and it's so
Yep.
great to be able to provide some of that service,
Eh, Yeah, and the other thing I'll say to that, one thing to what you were saying is the really cool being able to find clinicians that, are really a great fit for this particular individual. There's so many private clinicians that are awesome, but then, they might really connect with this person, but they're like 40, 50 miles away. With teletherapy and telehealth, I mean, we've kind of been able to eliminate that barrier in a sense where now you could really hop around for what's going to be the best fit and really give that adolescent, that adult, whoever, the support that they need. So that's been a really, really positive thing that I've seen as well.
Yeah. And
of course, I think there's always going to be that need for in-person, as well. I think what we've kind of seen is the kind of like a marriage between the two, where maybe for this particular treatment plan, working with this particular individual, teletherapy is the way to go. Maybe if you're working with somebody else who maybe needs to get out of the house and kind of have that true contact in a sense, maybe that's somebody that's physically coming to the office. So it's so great that we're kind of seeing the positives of both. Because I remember like a year ago, year and a half before everything went down, so many people I spoke to said teletherapy is never going to be a thing. It's not the same thing. You can't fully see the person. We've kind of proved them wrong in that sense, where we really kind of see that it can also, really be
yeah. And helpful also in the mental health. Like I know a lot of teenagers and high schoolers,
right.
Their schedules are so packed, to leave home, drive the half hour to the therapist. So like now they can just do like, there's a, like it's a lot less resistance, a little more effortless, because it doesn't always have to take up as much time, But yes, that hybrid approach. I think Anthony writing a comment in there.
Yes, I was just looking at that. That's a double thumbs up. I think that's a great point.
Yeah, because it's a tool, and how do we make it more accessible? And if we can, and if kids are working and they have practice till 8 o'clock, but they don't want to get in a car, and well, there you go, that's a win, and same thing for parents who are, struggling to drive with their kids from tutors to this to that. This is a much, in terms of time committing to it, you can get the support and get the help, and it's not an additional burden in any way, a challenge, very much more accessible. That's the word I'm looking for.
Yep. Agreed.
So I think you're right. We could probably go on and on about this subject, but I do, I think you brought some great points up. I love that native technology and
digital migrant and digital native.
I'm going to walk away with that one. That's something I think is really great. And I also want to
away from it.
Yeah, and the idea too of what are we doing on those screens? I think that's such a great question. I'm gonna propose that to my parents if we're talking too. It's like if they're on their screens for hours, doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. It's what they're doing with it,
right?
And why are they on?
Correct.
There, So
correct.
Michael, I appreciate you coming on tonight. You've been, first of all, I'm glad you're my friend, but also we really enjoyed working together. I think we've made a good team. I know you're a valuable part of our team here. And I just want to thank you for coming on a little bit tonight.
Oh, thank you so much. Pleasure. I do it anytime. This was a blast. And like you said, it's always great having a conversation with you. So.
Yes, very good. So we'll have to do something again. But until then, we'll hope you get home, get back to the little guy at home. And I'm go home and chase down my older ones. But you have a good night then.
You as well. Take care, Gordon. Take care, everybody.
All right, Michael. Thanks so much. Bye-bye, everybody.
You